like a form of government.
Conquer other
Form of government.
Go around and
Conquering other places.
just go around and set colonies.
Alright, it is a lot like colonization. And that's where you look at it. Because you are controlling other areas. Now, the time period we're at, we call it for the turn of the century, around the turn of 1900s, the late 1800s, early 1900s. What country basically ruled the world?
Britain.
Yeah, Britain. And this is when you had the saying that the sun never sets on the British Empire. Why did they have that saying?
Was it where?
One land on every continent.
Yeah, land on every continent. Okay, they owned Australia. Okay, they controlled India, parts of China and Asia, at least a third of Africa. They had a couple of places in South America. They were smaller. They still had Canada as a part of their country. It wasn't truly a colony anymore because for what they're doing. But that's where for all over the world. Now, meanwhile, for the United States, remember we had Manifest Destiny. What was the idea of Manifest Destiny? Yeah, keep expanding from coast to coast. Well, we got from coast to coast. Where do we go from there? And that's where we're at. All right, the causes for our imperialism, which is sometimes called New Manifest Destiny. First of all, we wanted to join the imperial powers. The other, besides Britain, who else was getting lands all over the world?
Spain.
Okay, France. Spain had it, but they were still losing it. Spain was weak. But there's a new country. Portugal's kind of
Italy.
drifted off. Now, Italy has finally joined together as a country in the late 1800s. Italy was not very powerful at all, though. There was a country that had joined together and now has emerged upon the world scene very rapidly in the late 1800s.
Germany.
Russia.
Not Russia.
Germany.
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 All right, Germany. Italy and Germany in the late 1800s would come together. Now, Italy would not be a world power. Germany would be when all those different German states would come together. Now, Russia is the sleeping bear. Okay, it's there, it's huge, but it's just lagging behind in technology. Germany wasn't. So we wanted to join with them.
Is Germany landlocked?
No.
What sea is it connected to?
Baltic. I believe the Baltic up to the north of it, then to get out. So, all right, social Darwinism. This also kind of goes in with the same idea. I'm trying not to make too many causes, but joining some together. Now, we had social Darwinism of businesses, where one, if the business is better than the other, survival of the fittest of the businesses. How does social Darwinism have to do with us with other countries?
Because we have to be better than them to survive. If they're going to take us over, we have to compete with them.
Okay, well, we're competing with them, and then the survival of the fittest. And this is where a lot of those European countries and we as Americans were saying, well, maybe we are more superior to them. And that's what. Which, here's a word that you might remember this from world history, but jingoism. And whenever you see that, kind of think of social Darwinism and what in the British side, they called it the white man's burden. And it's kind of like that, what they're supposed to do is take care of other people. Now, does this sound pretty racist when I say that the Chinese were not able to take care of themselves? They needed the Europeans to help guide them along. All right, you know, they'd only been around for thousands of years. Okay, but now they need Britain there. Africa couldn't survive without the European countries. And we as Americans, we join along with this idea. There was the white man's burden. Okay, new markets, raw materials. One of the things we had with Manifest Destiny is where we could always expand. We had new places to go. Well, when we ran out of land, let's go other areas. But those other areas had people on it. Yeah, so we didn't worry about the Indians before, right?
Just get them to give us their land.
Now, I have on here, is this basically colonialism? But we wouldn't call it colonialism, right? As Americans, why are we not going to call it colonialism and call them colonies?
We were colonies.
Yeah, we were a colony and we said that was bad. So just, you know, semantics, change the word there and same thing. Once again, popping up, which actually yesterday, I don't think anybody got this wrong and there with things, but the closing of the thesis, the idea of the frontier thesis that Frederick Jackson Turner had done. When he had written about we were great because we could always expand. Some people say it's still today, the difference is what will make America great is can we still expand economically, not taking over areas, but if we can dominate over other areas economically. Remember President Arthur. There wasn't a whole lot about Arthur besides the civil service reform, but one other thing that he did that a lot of times is forgotten is he updated our Navy. So we now got these nice, shiny, modern ships. We're just going to let them sit in the harbor. When you got a new toy, what do you want to do?
Play with it.
Yeah, you want to go play with it. In here. Plus, and this is where you might remember from your people reports, this book written by Alfred T. Mahan, which has said the countries that were the most powerful were there because they had great navies. And we made our Navy and modeled it after what he had said. And we were modeling after Britain. And we went and became one of the top 10 navies. Realistically, probably into the top 5 at that time. Now today, is it sea power which will make a country great?
Air
What
power.
kind of power? Military. Yeah, air power. I mean, think about us for the United States. The main thing that they have that other countries really hate us for is the fact that we have drones flying all over. Okay, that we're going in and bombing areas, and we don't even put our soldiers' lives at risk. So you kind of say, all right, 100 years later, we've gone from sea power to air power. Even with the Navy, we don't even worry about battleships anymore. What is the #1 ship for the Navy? Yeah, the aircraft carriers. So even our Navy is based around air power. And then submarines, which we'll see in the next thing comes up, or next section. All right, how do we get Alaska? First of all, it's nicknamed Seward's Folly. Why is it nicknamed Seward's Folly?
Because Seward bought it.
Yeah, William Seward was our Secretary of State. He bought it in 1867, or was one that negotiated the deal for it. Sometimes called Seward's Icebox. In other words, did Americans like the idea of this?
No.
All right, and we bought it from Russia. Why did we purchase it?
So we could build a line, like a communication line.
Right, I think I told a story before about how we were trying to get a telegraph line to go across the Atlantic Ocean, and it kept breaking when we were going across. So we were actually making a plan and negotiating to try to have a line go up through Alaska, across the Bering Strait, all the way across Russia to connect with Europe. So New York and London would be connected with a telegraph wire, but by a little bit longer route. We ended up not doing that route. We also, though, and this is one of the little side things, even though we're friends with Britain, when Britain was looking to do the same thing, did we want them to buy Alaska? They already had Canada. Did we want them to get Alaska from Russia?
No.
So we wanted to grab it before they did. So part of that's kind of one of those things. Some of you, even though you're friends, are you competitive with the other person? Brenna, Taylor? Okay, I mean, there's a little thing there that, okay, you have a little competition. So we are.
Okay, where are we supposed to connect again? The telegraph?
Well, we were actually trying to get London and New York, the two biggest cities for the United States and Britain, connected together. Now, we finally did get a transatlantic cable, so we didn't have to go in that route. But that was actually why we started the negotiations to go. All right, Hawaii. Cannot pronounce her name. Anybody in here fluent in Hawaiian that can pronounce? That actually is sounding real good, so there you have it. And if you remember, she gave us her country. Wasn't that sweet of her?
Who's that one guy that recruit that came?
There she is. All right, Stanford Dole, who is this guy down here? Got a ZZ Top type beard. Yeah.
Nice beard.
I have a question about the Alaska thing. It says what was found there before the end of the
Oh, well, I forgot to say. Yeah, when we got Alaska, a lot of people said it was Seward's Folly. What did we find a couple decades? Not oil.
Gold.
We would have a gold rush. Before we would have the TV shows about gold rush, we'd have the initial gold rush that we have. Then later on, oil. And of course, Sarah Palin. I I mean, those are the three gems that we have got from Alaska: gold, oil, and Sarah Palin. I mean, thank goodness that we spent that money in lobbies. Sorry, I forgot about that. That was in your notes. All right, going back to Hawaii though, Stanford Dole was one of a group of plantation owners in Hawaii. They grew pineapples, they grew sugar, and I have on here the 1890 McKinley Tariff. I really have stayed away a lot of times with tariffs because I mean I don't want you to get overwhelmed with the different tariffs. We went into the tariff abominations a little more in detail, but other than that, we really haven't. And they went up and down, but this is one that really affected change in the history. The McKinley Tariff made it where if they are sending their sugar in from Hawaii, it would be from a foreign country. So they would end up having to pay taxes on it. So, but if Hawaii became part of the United States, they would not have to pay those taxes.
True.
So that is why they were wanting to be part of the United States. There's a bunch of Americans there, and that actually was part of the things that made them decide to go and ask the Queen to give up her country with a little persuasion. Because what if she decided not to give up her country?
We didn't do it.
They were going to take over anyways, and she really couldn't stop them. And that is where sugarcane happened. Now, as a country for the United States, besides having some of our richer men over there, why else did we want to have this area of Hawaii? Besides sugarcane, not vacation jets.
It's halfway to Asia.
Okay, naval reasons. We have this great white fleet, as it's starting to become known as. We have these modern navies. If we want to send them to other parts of the world, what are they fueled by in the 1890s?
Coal.
Coal. You can only carry so much coal. So we need to have in various parts of the world areas that we control that we can have coal stations so they can go and get a fill up. All right, so if we are going to go all the way across to Asia, all right, we can stop, fill up, and have coal in order to go. So that is where militarily we looked at things and said, this is why we want to have that. All right, the Spanish-American War, our causes. First of all, the one that you've had this word pop up again and again, yellow journalism, where they take a story and sensationalize it. They like to sell newspapers. When there's a war going on, news ratings go up. People will watch the news. Okay, if you are a news channel, you love wars because people will watch that. They love hurricanes too because people like to watch that. But that time, your newspapers, and this is where we have Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst that have the two rival papers there, and they want to have the stories. One of the stories that they wrote a lot about was, you see this, Wyler the Butcher, and this is where some of the cartoons come in. This is the leader that Spain had controlling Cuba, and so we wrote stories about how evil he was to them there. And when they had a rebellion led by Jose Marte, which is kind of like the Cuban George Washington there, but he put it down. And when he put it down, he did what if you're a person, you have some people rebelling, you might do. He crushed it, and he punished the people involved with it. But we made the stories make it look like, all right, he was really cruel to them. Exaggerated things. The other major thing that we have with yellow journalism is the lone letter. Put stars by this because we're going to have something later on that I don't want you to make a mistake that I made in college in here. Don't confuse the Zimmerman note with the lone letter. The lone letter is with the Spanish-American War. The Zimmerman note, when we have that, will be with World War I. They're close in time, but they're both close in. They called our president weak. Yeah. Are we allowed to make fun of our president?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we can say whatever we want. We can make fun of them. We can go and talk about them. But it's kind of like your mom. All right? You can go and complain about your mom, but can someone else complain about your mom? All right, guys, remember that with girlfriends. Okay, your girlfriend might complain about their mom constantly. All right, but then when you decide to say something along the same thing that she said 20 times in the past 2 weeks, All right, no, you're not, don't you talk that way about it. All right, and we're that way as Americans. All right, don't you make fun of our president. We can make fun of him here. Then we would have the thing that really, truly blows it all up. Because the USS Maine will blow up. And you saw a couple of pictures on that video with McKinley there. But it blows up in Havana Harbor. How do we know that it happened today? It wasn't a mine. It was boiler explosion. What's a boiler? There's steam motor. You take the coal, you have to boil the water to make the steam. Well, if you have to have so much pressure. Well, if it got too hot where the steam couldn't escape quick enough, the boiler explodes. And that ended up blowing up the ship. Which, we're pretty sure now that is how it blew up. But did we wait in our papers at that time to go and explain anything or say that might have been the cause or investigate it? How did it blow up? The Spanish blew it up. So we go and you add together the USS Maine, that yellow journalism, with the lone letter, and our true desire to maybe get some land, and there we have. I always like this picture. Look, they have the bodies lined up in there, everything else. I mean, the pictures that they have. Spanish treachery. Destruction of warship Maine was the work of the enemy. On the Spanish right there in the beginning.
How did they, did they just go back and increase?
Well, we kind of know with what happened. Yeah, it wasn't anything that was done by the Spanish. It was something that happens periodically with steamships at a time.
So, the lone letter, who called it Cuban?
All right, Delome is a Spanish, not the Cubans. He is Spanish, and the Spanish control Cuba. So we are sitting there saying the Spanish are being really mean to Cuba. Cuba is 90 miles from our shore. And you notice on here, this is an excerpt from the letter, but it shows once more what McKinley is, weak and catering to the rabble. That's what the Spanish ambassador had written about our president. I don't should be talking about him that way.
Did he send that to the president?
No, I can't remember what it was to, but we had intercepted the letter too. This one we know also did happen. We're going to see what the Zimmerman knows. There's some questions on it. All right, the Spanish-American War. Our bracketing test the very first week of school. What year was the entire Spanish-American War? Yeah, 1898. It's called the Splendid Little War because it begins and ends all in 1898. It's not much of a war for those of you military historians. Remember what we had for the Civil War? Don't worry about it. We don't have very much talk. What's actually one of the more important things, put stars by this, and here's where I want you to you're going to have to start knowing a couple of these little details and knowing what country or what place they're attached with. Before we declared war, we had what was called the Teller Amendment. It was an addition to the Declaration of War. And what it said is, we're not going to war to take Cuba. We are going there to free Cuba from Spain. Right? We have no imperialistic ideals or reasons for this war. We're doing it just to free people. Did we say anything about any other area that Spain owned? No, just Cuba. Okay, so those of you future lawyers in here, does that mean that we have to worry about freeing any other places? Or at least if we free them, do we have to worry about letting them be their own? So our very first battle was General Dewey, or Admiral Dewey actually, goes and attacks the Spanish Navy at Manila Bay, which is in the Philippines, just right around the corner from Cuba. You know, strategically, if you want to attack Cuba, the first place you need to go after is the Philippines. Is our intention to free Cuba, or what is our intention, should I say? Yeah, we're wanting to get land. Okay, that's where we go. And again, you kind of see here with some of the war is good, they're selling newspapers for the sensationalism that we have. All right, we're in the Caribbean. All right, yes, Cuba's in and the Caribbean. Anybody recognize this? You've been in Tampa? The University of Tampa today. What was the Platt Hotel is now part of University of Tampa, and you see these domes that they have there. But that is what is University of Tampa. That was the staging ground for the Spanish-American War. War has been good for us in the state of Florida. Right? Even our current war is good. Where is the headquarters for our war on terrorism? Where did our General Petraeus have an affair? And we have another person that has been in the news recently. What city? Yeah, Tampa. We basically base everything out of MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa. So we have, war has still been good for the state of Florida. Even this latest war, which is fought on the other side of the world, okay, we're headquartered. A lot of these drones that are being flown in Pakistan and other areas are being flown out of Tampa. Okay, you're sitting at computers. Some of you could fly a drone easy because you played enough video games. All right, you are in training. Maybe that's the conspiracy. The U.S. military is training you to be future warriors. But that is the staging of it. For the war itself, more of the soldiers died from yellow fever and other diseases than actual bullets. We would fight in both Cuba and Puerto Rico. The biggest battle, the most famous, is San Juan Hill. So yeah, some pictures of it. And it really wasn't much of a battle. The most famous of all the troops were the Rough Riders. Now, why did the Rough Riders get so much press?
Theodore Roosevelt?
Yeah, because Theodore Roosevelt. Here he was, a very vocal person in the government, resigns from his office and goes into this volunteer cavalry. The cavalry is led by Leonard Wood. I remember him from your People reports. But Leonard Wood is the leader of it. He's the actual military leader, but most people think of Teddy Roosevelt, especially Sacagawea, because if you saw in the one movie, Night at the Museum, okay? That's where you're getting a height of Teddy Roosevelt as the Rough Rider. Okay, and this is where he's done. All right, see this picture of him? Does it look like Robin Williams in Night at the Museum?
It does.
All right, and that is what he is, again, someone that the press is following around. All right, there were a lot, and this is one thing, kind of look at things for war, and now we have a segregated military, and there, one thing that we did is after our force went in there, we left an occupying force of a lot of black soldiers. They were called the Immunes. Why were they nicknamed the Immunes?
So they would get the yellow fever instead of asthma people?
Well, we thought they were. We said, oh, okay, well, our black soldiers, they're more immune to yellow fever. Were they anymore? No. Okay, but they ended up dying. But this is where you kind of see, and some of the idea, even in America, did they care as much than if you had a lot of black soldiers that were dying, that were occupying at that time? Was there an uproar about that?
No.
Okay, so this is where, in part you have to realize is that we have the military. The United States, we are saying that we're freeing one group of people, yet we have a segregated military. All right, the end of the war. In the United States, have we ever taken any land from anybody?
No.
No. And then once again, we pay for the land. Okay, we told Spain they could have it back. All right, well, sort of. And we paid them $20 million for the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Did we pay them for Cuba? No, but were we trying to take over Cuba?
Yeah.
No, we were freeing Cuba. I know I didn't mention Guam in there. Yeah, while we were there, we also took over Guam. Okay, so because that's also strategic in helping out
Isn't
Cuba.
Guam like so little?
But Guam is a very important place to have a naval station in the South Pacific. We have Hawaii. We need someplace south of there for another military base. And then we have the Philippines. We basically made a triangle out in the Pacific Ocean. And we'd have another one when we would split up the Samoan Islands with Germany. We would take some, they would take some. So we actually have 4 places then scattered around the Pacific Ocean to have naval stations there. All right, remember the Teller Amendment? Remember Cuba with that. And Teller is before the war. Platt is going to be after it. Here is what might be one of the most important things to remember for this view when you think test-wise. Cuba was allowed to become their own country, but we made them put the Platt Amendment in their constitution. And to make it really, really simple, the Platt Amendment basically says that, yes, we are our own country, but the United States can do whatever they want to us. That's a very oversimplified version. But realistically, we had to approve whatever they decided. So are they truly free? No, they aren't. Plus, they had to give us their second best harbor. Anyone know what the second best harbor in Cuba is? Yeah, Guantanamo Bay. Play anything into modern history? So even later on, when we get to the 1960s and Fidel Castro, we still have that. The second best harbor in Cuba is still under American possession because at the end of the war we got Puerto Rico. Yeah.
Is the Platt Amendment still in
No.
effect? All right.
Which is one of the reasons why Fidel Castro comes into power, because Cuba was not really free and we weren't.
Is he gonna die anytime soon?
He's gonna live forever. I don't know. When I was in high school, we were waiting for Fidel Castro to die, and that was many, many years ago. Okay. One of the good political cartoons that I have shows the presidents from the time that Fidel Castro became in power. It starts with Eisenhower and goes all the way through George W. Bush. Because technically he is his brother in power now, not him. So, but you could unofficially you could put Obama with that. So Eisenhower was in power when Fidel Castro first came to power. So most of your parents weren't born in Eisenhower's presidency. So, what? He's fairly old. I don't know his actual age. All right, where Teller and Platt, remember Cuba, Puerto Rico, and again, I'm not going to go into a lot of details on here, because for one thing, it's pretty dry. But remember, Foraker and Jones Act would set up Puerto Rico and set it up as a territory or a protectorate. Puerto Rico is not its own country. It's not a colony of the United States. We own Puerto Rico, but we give them some independent rights there. So it's kind of a quasi ownership that we have. And even in their last election, Puerto Rico, a lot of them had voted to go for independence. But right now it doesn't look like it'll probably go one way or another. We're still a little ways away before that'll happen. It's hard for Puerto Rico to decide whether or not they want to. As the United States, if they were to become a state of the United States, they would be the poorest state of the United States by far. If they were to become an independent country, they would be the richest country in the Caribbean. Okay, so, but they kind of get the best of both worlds by what they have right now. So which direction do they want to go? And that's what for the country, they're kind of divided up in thirds, and they're not sure for what they want to do. All right, we're going to stop there, and we'll do the Philippines Act. And Jones Act, which should you think of? Okay, Puerto Rico. I'm telling you, just put those in your head, and make sure that you know them. I'm not going, especially with the 4-Acre Act and Jones Act, I'm not going to go into major details in it. The Platt Amendment is the most important of those things, because that is something that really upsets Cuba over time, because even though they're free, they're truly not free. So we're able to give basically almost veto almost anything they have. All right. One of the biggest consequences of the Spanish-American War was the Philippine War after that. See, we went to war to free Cuba. Were we there to free the Philippines? No. So we go to the Philippines, and you might remember him from our people reports, the George Washington of the Philippines. And he helped us in getting rid of the Spanish. Well, the Philippines assumed that they were going to be free. We did not have that plan. And then they decided they did not want us to have them as colonies. Which, one of the most ironic things I've ever read is about how we were going to try to Christianize the Philippines. What religion were most of the people in the Philippines? and they were Catholic, so they were already Christian. But that was one of the things, and this is kind of going back to the white man's burden and missionary idea. But we were taking over. This is one that kind of shows our imperialistic ideas. The Philippine War was a lot more costly than the Spanish-American War was. Yeah.
Why would we say we wanted to Christianize another country if we have freedom?
Yeah, but that's why some people said that we should go to other areas. Yes. Not officially as a nation, but that's where a group of people supported
So
that.
when we took over them, we didn't want to give them freedom either?
Yeah, you're basically right. We are, even though we don't want to say it, we are making them a colony.
So what we're going to do with them?
We're going to use them to get raw materials, use them for markets, which is the whole thing that colonization is. And military-wise, why do we want the Philippines? Basically, as a coal station, we now have a place that we can go that is close
But then would they
to
live
the
like
nation.
Americans in the United States?
What?
Would they live like Americans in the United States?
Not really. I mean, we were not treating them as equals. Neither did we do with Puerto Rico. Okay, they were our subjects. Right? We hate to say it that way, but that is pretty much what we were doing. What Britain had done to us before. Now, did we help out the Philippines and Puerto Rico in many ways? Yeah, just like Britain helped out the colonies in America. But we were not letting them be their own country or determine their fate. All right, the cost was over $400 million, 4,200 deaths. Again, militarily, we lost a lot more people in this war than we did in the splendid little Spanish-American War. A name that you might notice, William Howard Taft. Taft becomes the civilian governor over the Philippines. Now, we eventually would promise the Philippines that we would let them be their own country. Just talking about with today being Pearl Harbor Day, and that's where we were expecting it. So in 1941, the Philippines still weren't their own country. We weren't being real rapid on our promise to them there. All right, here are some cartoons, and this is a time period that you're going to see a lot of cartoons. Uncle Sam is the main character in a lot of these. Now, look at this center one that we have. What is Uncle Sam doing?
Putting
Hey,
flags on
American flags
continents
on them.
or countries.
Yeah, he's putting the flags throughout the world on here. I can't read all the places on here that you have, but throughout the world. So it's kind of the idea of imperialism and taking places over places.
Did Thomas Nast make Uncle Sam? Or
I believe he is. I'm not sure though, but I believe he was the person that did that. Here's where some of that idea of the white man's burden. This is supposed to be McKinley with a person from Africa. We have Lady Liberty in this case, but notice her crown. All right, it is the turrets of battleships. Okay, so and Puck was a magazine at the turn of the century. You kind of look at this now, this picture of Uncle Sam here. Notice the words are written in Spanish, so that was not too flattering for the United States when we're there. Here we have Uncle Sam, and now we have all these children that we're having to take care of.
Is McKinley like throwing the kid off the cliff or something?
Kind of on the edge of it, yeah. Is he saving them or is he throwing them off? All right, here's where we're kind of finishing up with some of the stuff for imperialism. We also would take over Samoa between us and Germany. Again, we needed another coal station there in the South Pacific. The American Virgin Islands, we purchased those from the Netherlands. Later on, we would have with the British Virgin Islands, we will get some of those during the Second World War. Anti-Imperialist Leagues, what are they against? Imperialism. They're saying that the United States should not be going and taking over other parts of the world. Now, here's where we come to the important side. I mean, you ought to know what it's about, but why would these different people be against us going to other parts of the world? Samuel Gompers, who is he? Yeah, leader of the AFL. So why would a union leader not want us to go and take over other parts of the world?
Because there'd be more jobs like outside of the U.S.
Okay, there would be a job competition outside the U.S. which what would that mean for worker salaries here in America? Go down. I mean, you can kind of look and see, and those of you that think everything happens for dollars, well, the reason why Samuel Gompers didn't want to have that is he was trying to protect workers and have American workers make a good salary. Andrew Carnegie, why would he not want us taking over other parts of the world?
Because there's other oil there.
Well, not oil. What's he in?
Steel.
He's in steel. But it's the same thing. There's he would have competition in for his steel. If we ended up having steel mills in the Philippines or someplace else, they could rival him, and he doesn't want that. Who's Mark Twain? Now, why would Mark Twain, a writer who's writing Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer and all kinds of good short stories, why is he against us going to other parts of the world? He was racist? Unlikable. Actually, here's where we have a person just for moral reasons. He thought it was wrong for us to be doing. Which, yeah, we have someone that isn't selfish reasons. But we do have that where there are people in America saying, this is wrong for what we are doing. And Mark Twain was by far the most famous writer and speaker at that time, or humorist in many ways. 1900 election. Not as big as the 1896 election 4 years before, but we have the exact same candidates and we have the exact same conclusion. The only difference was William Jennings Bryan says, okay, bimetallism doesn't win elections. Let me find something else. Okay, let's use imperialism. And do the people support imperialism when Bryan's being against it? So William James Bryan loses another election. One little side note on this, McKinley switches his vice president and chooses a person that the Republicans wanted to give in a job that sounds real important but doesn't do anything. Who do they want to put as vice president? Teddy Roosevelt. So Theodore Roosevelt, which is the greatest place to put a person that you want them to do nothing. Unless, of course, what happens? He dies. And guess what happens to McKinley early in that second term? He's assassinated.
Does the vice president actually do anything if he's not?
The official duties in the Constitution is the vice president assumes the duties of the president, if the president was to not be able to perform them, and cast tie-breaking vote in the Senate, and they are the leader of the Senate. Now, in recent years, we've had very active vice presidents. Al Gore, Joe Biden today, Dick Cheney may be the most powerful vice president we had. But during your lifetime, you have seen the most that we've ever allowed for vice presidents to do. But historically, vice presidents, it used to be a joke that you would send vice presidents to go to the funerals of people that are not important enough for the president or the Secretary of State to go to. So if you had a leader of a country die that we just don't consider real important, Obama's not going, Hillary Clinton's not going, we'll send Joe Biden. Actually, we don't want to send Joe Biden to a funeral. That's all what he'll say there. So, all right, so now we got to find him some other job.
So glad no one assassinated him.
All right, here's where the next thing that we have is China. John Hay is our Secretary of State. One of the most important Secretary of States in history, for a simple fact, all the stuff in imperialism is going on. I'm going to, again, take something that you may have had with AP World History. You might have had this before. Now we're going to look on it on an American point of view. He would write the open door notes. When you see open door notes, you should be thinking China. Plain and simple, it's about China. Now, what he wants to do is he wants to make it simple, he wants to open up China for us to basically trade in there. What the European countries and Japan had done is they had taken China and almost like a pie, they had gone through and they had made it where they each have what they call the spheres of influence. So for your SFIs, make sure that you put open doors notes with spheres of influence. But what it really comes down to is they each have areas that they are the main person in charge of China with the trading. It's not truly as colonies, but we're not letting China be free with this. Okay.
What about the places that weren't controlled by the other?
That was usually wasn't areas that was worth the while economically.
So
they went through the areas that there was something economic that. The Root-Takara Agreement, I actually shouldn't have had this in this part, but while we were negotiating with this, we make an agreement with Japan that we will recognize each other's spheres of influence. Did we ask the Chinese anything about this? No.
Yeah, so they just stood by and let.
Yeah, but, well, did they stand by? No. Here's where the other connection you need to make with your SFIs. The Chinese, they had what the nationalists had what was called the Boxer Rebellion. Anyone know why it was called Boxer Rebellion?
Boxers.
A lot of the soldiers that had a form of martial arts that looked like, when they were starting to do it, the style of boxing. Now, were you seen on the one movie? How was it the old-fashioned style of boxing?
Use cannon a little bit more.
You know, when they had the fist up like this. So this is where, when they would start some of their martial arts, it looked like that type of boxing. So it was nicknamed the Boxers' Rebellion. To tell you how much China had and the say-so of their own country, we had a combination of armies, British, French, Japanese, and yes, Americans participated, although we had a very small part of this. But we defeated the Boxers and those that wanted to basically be independent for their own country. It's not just the United States. We're joining in with other parts of the world, and China was subdued.
So it was the Chinese nationalists that got defeated?
Yeah, the Chinese nationalists were the ones that were defeated, or Boxers, but that's
And
the
then
China.
they later made, like, let them go.
Well, some of them were executed that were involved with it. Others were imprisoned.
No, like, I mean, like, now China owns China. Like,
Well, they finally became their own country after World War II. All right, remember the Chinese Exclusion Acts? We had done it in 1882, 1892, 1902, make it permanent. We don't need to vote on this there, which meant we weren't going to allow the Chinese into it. The Gentleman's Agreement is with what country? Japan. Where, and most of you on your SFI test had that right, but the Gentleman's Agreement was one that we, after San Francisco had segregated the schools with the Japanese, we made a diplomatic issue and basically said we were not going to have any immigration from Japan. Then we have the Portsmouth Conference. It was what was the end of the Russo-Japanese War. Russia fighting Japan. Now, Russia, even though it's in Europe and Asia, is considered a European country because most of the people live in Europe. Japan, if you look at it militarily, Japan won this war. And when they were doing the peace negotiations, they came to Portsmouth in New England, and Teddy Roosevelt was the person that worked out this negotiation. And this cartoon kind of actually shows a lot of the things with this. This is supposed to be the Russian, which you see is kind of beat up, has an artificial leg, got arm cut off, has an advantage. The Japanese guy looks all healthy. But when everything was negotiated with this treaty, it was as if it was a tie. Now, part of Japanese culture is that you do not embarrass another person. So they were not going to call out Teddy Roosevelt on what he did. Meanwhile, Europe gives Teddy Roosevelt our first Nobel Peace Prize ever won by an American. The Europeans do not want to have an Asian country defeating a European country, so that's where they came. Now, the long-term effects of this. Japan would remember this. Did we embarrass their country? Our president. And we have the Gentleman's Agreement, which we basically have this agreement, we're not going to let you in, that way we won't segregate you. So we have several things happening. Now, why did the Japanese just not basically go and give us a little punch at that time? Yeah, they weren't strong enough. But would this kind of sit with them for a while? And some of the reasoning that they had for this day in 1941 goes back to this agreement at the Portsmouth Conference, and this treaty goes back to the Gentleman's Agreement, goes back to the Root-Takara Agreement that we had, where we kind of were taking advantage of the Japanese all along. We were not treating them as an equal country. And when their military was strong enough, that's where they were trying to push us out of Asia. All right, and that's the end of the notes today because it kind of fits in with policy. Now, when you see big stick policy, you need to be thinking Teddy Roosevelt foreign policy. We're going to end up, and here's where, once we start with Teddy Roosevelt, you're going to kind of have to know what different one, foreign policy and domestic policy. Domestic policy is what's going on inside the country, foreign policy is outside of it. We're going to be looking at the foreign policy. Now, speak softly and carry a big stick.
That's words.
Okay? Because what you do is you speak real soft, and when they come up to you and they lean over, then you nail them on top of the head with it. What is our big stick?
Nukes.
No,
Navy.
at that time it was our Navy. All right, and this is where it was nicknamed the Great White Fleet. Why is it nicknamed the Great White Fleet?
Because we killed the shark.
No.
Because the ships were white.
Yes, the ships were painted white as we sailed around. Now, today, do we paint our ships white?
No.
No,
What do we paint them?
nothing.
Yeah, it's a gray. All right, we painted it gray. That way, it kind of is able. The navy gray is actually the have. You can go and you can hide a little bit more of the dirt and things.
Do other countries have different types of colors for their navy?
Some will have a little bit, but gray is kind of a more of a color that you're going to have on a ship because still you can kind of see when things are rusting. You don't want to make it where it's a rust color because you want to fix something if it's rusting. At the same time, keeping white clean is something that you don't want. But that is where it was nicknamed at. He sent them on a tour around the world. Why?
Just to show everybody that we got it.
Okay, and that's it. All right, show everybody that we got it. We're one of the big boys now. Now, here's a famous cartoon that you see, and you're going to see there's a lot of political cartoons with Teddy Roosevelt. I love things with political cartoons because you can say so much in a political cartoon. But you notice the big stick, and he's kind of being as a policeman now. You may not be able to see the picture as well, but if you look at it, you'll see that a lot of the people would be people that you look at that we think would be in South America, Latin America. Now, put stars, arrows, all kinds of things are pointing to the Roosevelt Corollary. It is an addition to the Monroe Doctrine. Let's go back to the Monroe Doctrine. What did it say?
Stay out of the Western Hemisphere.
Who stay out of the Western Hemisphere?
Other countries.
All right, other countries, Europe in particular. 1823, President Monroe issued it, again written by John Quincy Adams, but it was telling when all these places were breaking away from Spain, it was kind of going towards Britain and France, don't make colonies over here. So you stay out of the business in the Western Hemisphere. Roosevelt Corollary builds upon that. We're still telling Europe to stay out of the business in the Western Hemisphere, but are we going to tell ourselves to do it? And this is where, today we talk about sometimes being the policeman of the world. We kind of said, well, we're going to be the policeman of the Western Hemisphere. Britain, France, Germany, you stay out of what's going on this hemisphere, but we can get involved in it. And have we as the United States ever gotten involved in anything in the Western Hemisphere?
No.
Absolutely not.
Which, this is where you have to put yourself in the shoes, and I hate to say it this way, but to our little brothers or cousins to the south. Do we ever go and tell them to do something and they not do it? And how do we react when we tell our little brother or cousin to do something, they don't do it? How do we react?
With an open fist.
We punch them, or we use the big stick. And this is where Teddy Roosevelt goes. And we would do it. And I have on here, the U.S. could intervene when necessary in Latin America. Notice some of these cartoons here. It's like Roosevelt sitting on pointing down. This is, I think, is that Santo Domingo? But again, we're using our military. It's kind of like some of you, if you have a younger brother or sister, okay, you tell them, but what to do. All right, Sarah, you never had your brothers or sister ever do anything, or brothers do anything mean to you, right? Okay. Now, at the same time, if Zach would have done something to you, but he wouldn't have thought anything about it, but what if one of his friends was to do it?
He'd get really, really mad.
And that's kind of what the United States is. All right, we can pick on our brothers or little sisters down south, but you're not allowed to. Okay, it's kind of like where we had for Spain. You can't make fun of our president. We're allowed to. Okay, you can't. All right, one of the most successful things that happened was the building of the Panama Canal. Now, here's where history comes in. Now, I'm going to stretch a little bit with this story, not exactly this way, but we went down to the area for where Panama Canal is and figured out that that would be one of the two best places to build it. France and Britain both at times had tried to build a canal. They never were able to. What stopped them from building canals? Yeah, the mosquitoes. They would get down there, and there was so much with the diseases that were spread, malaria, yellow fever, that they could never get it started. The place that they looked to build it was in Nicaragua, a little bit north of Panama. But we kind of figured out that Panama would be a good place to build it. The problem is Panama was not its own country. It was owned by the country to the south. Let's see, we have the map of Colombia, but would be from Colombia. We asked Colombia to give us their state of Panama. Yeah. They told us no. So we said, well, here, we'll buy it from you. Give us the rights to build it. And they said no. Now, do we like it when our little brother tells us no?
No.
Now, things just happened to work out really good for the United States at this time, because a group of people in Panama decided they're going to break away and make their own country. And once you know it, we just happened to be having some military that happened to be real close to them when they broke away. And so when they declared their independence, we just happened to be there really soon afterwards to go and help them with their independence. And they decided they were so nice to us, they gave us a strip of land through the middle of their country. Gosh, wasn't that lucky of us? All right, just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Anyone suspect that maybe we had any encouragement of this for our own desires? But this is where we would get it. Even before that time, and here's where the SFI, to remember the Hay-Punch-Font Treaty, we would build the canal without Britain. Before that time, we had actually looked to build the canal with Britain. Now we're going to do it on our own. It would take us 10 years to build the canal, a whole series of blocks. It's actually incredible for the building that made it. Now, why did we want this canal?
Shorten the distance traveled.
Right, shorten the distance from the Atlantic Pacific. Okay, do not have to go around South America, much less even if you're going around it. Some of that area in the south of the area is not a very safe passage anyways. So time-wise, it's better for the United States. Military-wise, it is better for us. So that is why we wanted our intervention with it. But we would take over it, and we would actually control the canal zone until basically during your lifetime. Okay, it would be at the end of the Clinton presidency that we would give the canal over to Panama. A lot of people didn't like that at that time. The treaty was signed by President Carter, eventually was given over to them. But in some ways, we gave them a canal that was finished in 1914. Do you think it maybe needed a few repairs? Mm-hmm. And this is where Panama, over the last 10 years, has been trying to widen the canal out there.
Aren't they building another one?
But basically, yeah, they're making wider, and they was actually going to build another one in Nicaragua also.
Like, we went on a cruise, and our cruise ship went through it, the Panama Canal, and we had, I think it was like 10 inches on each side. Right,
and the problem, can any oil rigs get through there? Now, how about militarily? This is where people said, we can't do this because this will mess us up militarily. 1914, what was the most important ship in the U.S. Navy?
Battleship.
All right, a battleship. Today, what is the most important ships in the Navy?
Aircraft carrier.
Aircraft carrier, and what else? Submarines. Aircraft carriers wouldn't fit through that. And would you ever put a submarine going through there?
No.
Because the idea of a submarine is they don't know where you are. All right, if you're floating on top of the canal, we have these things called satellites today. Would it be pretty easy to find the submarines there when they're trying? So this is where militarily the Panama Canal is not near as important as it was in 1914. And So it pays. Now, one thing that for a lot of Americans we have is Panama could not afford to fix a canal themselves, so a lot of what they did was through Chinese contractors, and a lot of it's done by companies that are actually owned by China. So that's where part of the problem comes down economically. But militarily, it's not nearly as important as it would have been 100 years ago. All right, and of course Teddy Roosevelt went out there and dug it himself personally. Okay, you may not realize this, but he is a relative of Paul Bunyan.
Didn't he have polio?
What?
Didn't he have polio?
No, that's Franklin Roosevelt. So. All right, Taft and Wilson. Here's where we get to the really exciting part, which I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time because I don't want you to get too excited on it. Their foreign policy. After Roosevelt, we will have President Taft. His idea that he had was dollar diplomacy. So Roosevelt is big stick. Taft is dollar diplomacy. His idea was, we're not going to go down there and tell the people with a stick raised up or our cannon pointing to them, you do this. We're going to help them out. We're going to give them a loan, help them to build up their economy. They will become our trading partners. Sounds really good in theory. But what happens if we go and give their country a loan to build something and then they have an upheaval in their government, they switch things around, and they're maybe not able to repay their loan? How are we going to react to that our American companies aren't going to get repaid? Yeah. And ultimately, dollar diplomacy ended up having it where time and time again, we had to send the military in to go and make sure we got our money, our investment back. So even though Taft didn't want to use the big stick, he ultimately would use the big stick there. But he encouraged, and he was encouraging people to invest in Latin America. Then we get to the next president, Woodrow Wilson. This is the one that most people forget about. I have it up there as moral diplomacy. You might see it sometimes as missionary diplomacy. So it sounds really good. We're going to go down and we're going to help them out. We're going to, because it's our Christian duty to go down and help out our little brothers and cousins to the south. Except for what happens if when we go down there and try to help them out, they don't do things the way we want them to do. What do? No, we don't kill them. But we come back down with the big stick. And so when it comes down for Taft and Wilson, make sure that you identify their diplomacy with the big stick. But ultimately, time and time again, we will end up with our military having to go. We have done it many times in the U.S. history.
Who was the only president that was also a preacher? Just wondering, I couldn't remember.
It was one of the, not Arthur, not Garfield, but someone in that time period that was also one. All right, Mexican conflict. Our neighbor to the south. We as America, we always look down upon Mexico. Even today, we look at it, a lot of people think of Mexico as an extremely poor country. It is not a poor country. The only difference is it's sitting next to us and we are so rich as Americans. If Mexico is, as a whole per capita, better than many of the European countries that you would think that are rich. Now, one of the differences that you have, though, is disparity of wealth in Mexico. But we as Americans kind of always think of them as a really poor country. They have had a lot of political problems in the early 1900s, and I don't even remember all the things that we have, but we would end up having the government shift over and over again in a short period of time. And there was a lot of chaos in Mexico. President Wilson did not recognize when a President Huerta was elected. He said that it was done by fraud, and there was a lot of things pointing that it was. He actually sent some troops down that were near Veracruz, and we had a conflict with things, and we almost went to war with them. We didn't at that time. Later on, though, we would have a guy, Pancho Villa. Now, Pancho Villa for that time period was kind of like the Osama bin Laden for a long time, because we knew he was around, we just couldn't catch him. And we sent General Blackjack Pershing down there, John Pershing, and sent him to the soldier. So our army is running around North Mexico trying to capture Pancho Villa and his little band of rebels. They're hiding out in North Mexico, which is when you think of Mexico and some of you think of old Western movies and that really dry, hilly area. That's the way North Mexico is. He could never have it. Pancho Villa actually crossed in the United States and murdered some Americans, and we just could not catch him. What ultimately ended up saving face for the United States, where we eventually would get Osama bin Laden? How is it that we would save face with Pancho Villa?
Special forces.
Not special forces at that time.
Navy fire.
There's Pancho Villa.
We turned into a cat.
This is the wall.
No, we got preoccupied with a little thing called World War I.
Oh.
And that is where the problem kind of went away in that way.
And
So,
he
sometimes, you know, when you have a little problem that's just annoying, and something bigger comes up and you just realize, okay, this is what. And it would take us a long time before we would end up patching up relations. But in the 1930s, actually it started in the 1920s. Most people don't realize one of the things President Hoover would do is President Hoover would start to patch up a lot of our relationship with Latin America. Most people, when they think of President Hoover, they only think of negative with the Great Depression there. But Hoover would start patching up relations with Latin America, and then President Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, in the 1930s would do even more. All right, here's a couple different cartoons. The big one on the right-hand side. Who's the person? What's he got in his hand? What's he trolling behind him? What does it say on it?
Caribbean Sea.
Debt collector. Which realistically, we could turn around with Taft, because that's what we ultimately, with Taft, we would end up having the Great White Fleet go around in the Caribbean Sea, the idea there. Kind of see with Uncle Sam there, with some of the other pictures. Let's see, here's some more cartoons. All right, I always like this one. First of all, here's Uncle Sam. Who is this guy? Now, someone you don't recognize, notice they don't put the name Roosevelt on it, but for someone like this, they wrote McKinley. You may not be able to read it there, but they put. Now, McKinley's at a restaurant, and if you look on the background, the bill of fare. What are they selling?
Yeah.
Cuba steak. Yeah, Puerto Rico pig. Sandwich Islands. Philippine floating something. So it's basically our imperialism, and you have McKinley, who was president during the Spanish-American War. Meanwhile, the picture on the right, who was that?
Roosevelt.
Notice the big stick once again. If you didn't know what it was, they wrote on there, the big stick. He's riding on our ship. We look very fondly upon Theodore Roosevelt. He's one of our 4 presidents that we have on Mount Rushmore. And you look at that. He's with Lincoln, Jefferson, and Washington. He's our 4th one on Mount Rushmore. So we do think very highly of him. Latin America think real highly of him?
No.
So, and we look at that one. All right, that's the end of that section. Okay.